Woo, welcome back, beautiful people, to the second hour of LoveBabz, Love Talk on Babz Rawls-Ivy. I'm delighted, as I told you in the first hour, John Mills is here to talk about the 29th Colored Regiment. Hey, Mr. Mills, how you doing? Unmute yourself. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Hopefully you can hear me. You got me?
Yeah, I got you. I got you. I
Okay.
got
All right. All
you.
right. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. Or having me on. I do appreciate getting the word out about the 29th.
Oh, I'm so excited. I've been to the Criscola Park. I've seen the monument,
Right.
and I've been there for like remembrances and events that have happened there to remember the 29th Regiment. It's a
Right.
beautiful statue,
Oh yeah.
monument. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's where they trained. They used to be called Grapevine Point there, and so that's where they prepared. That's where they were reared up before they headed off. So yeah, where they put that monument, I think was appropriate, and what they displayed and built. Yeah, it's real nice.
Yes. All right. So what's your relationship to this? Like, this is not just a passing hobby. This is some of your family story.
Well, my I have a nonprofit. It's called Alex Breanne Corporation. It's named after my youngest daughter, and the intent of it is to find stories of the enslaved and or those in history of color who they may or may not have been created some conquest. They may or may not have been the Martin Luther Kings or the Rosa Parks, but they have a story of endurance, right? And so my nonprofit finds those stories, and after we find those stories, we try to like inject those people, their names, their images into those communities where they lived, worked, died, right? Change street names, create murals. And as a part of that, I give lectures about those people. So, my history, I've been a genealogist for many, many years and dug into my own genealogy and found the roots to enslavement and walked through woods where my ancestors were or over parking
Oh,
lots where they were buried underneath. I've been through that whole journey over the last 30 years. So for me, those people, no one knows them, but they mattered to me because I wouldn't be here if they didn't endure, right?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so that's what I do now. I try to find those people and highlight what they did.
So tell me about the 29th Regiment. So this is a colored regiment. I mean, that's the
Right,
word that they used back in the day. And
right,
these were the folks that fought in the Civil War.
right, right. Yeah. So, well, at the time, Connecticut, it was illegal prior to this point in time for a person of color to join a state militia, and so they just were not uh, legally a part of the. They were a part of the Civil War, but not legally as a part of the army. And so in 1862, things weren't going so great, and President Lincoln passed the Militia Act that said, okay, we're gonna let people of color, fight. They can't be paid as much, but they can fight. And right at that point, states started creating colored militias, right? And Connecticut didn't do that right away. They took them a little over a year and a half, but in late 1863, Connecticut was, their quota wasn't being met. Lincoln's quota for us was like 7,700 men. We had given them like 2,300. And so it was like, well, if you don't give us the other 5,400, we're going to double that by January 1st or January 5th of 1864. So Connecticut had to find a way to solve for that. So the way they solved for it was, well, they said we can create colored militias now. So let's create a colored militia. And then now you have the 29.
And so these men, these black men that served in the 29th Regiment, they weren't from Connecticut. They came from all points, didn't they?
Well,
When
yeah,
word
you
got
have,
out.
oh man, well, and absolutely, because, at the time, the African American, well, they weren't considered citizens at the time, so they were people of African descent, but they wanted to prove, we're just as, human as you are. And so a lot of people of African descent across the country were just looking for states or locations that would accept them to fight for this cause, right? So when Connecticut raised the 29th, if the regiment in their state of color was full, they came to Connecticut, right? And so you see a lot of people coming from other states coming to New Haven to say, hey, I'll sign up. I want to be a part of it. So yeah, they were from a lot of different places.
Wow. And so what was on the table I mean, I imagine that the biggest draw was we are men and we
Right.
want to fight, and we want to show you that we are equal to, right? And
Right.
we
Right.
want to, we are here. But then there was some pay discrepancy.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, that 1862 Militia Act, right off the bat, right within it says, okay, you can pay them $10 a month, and you can take $3 out of that for their clothing, so making it $7 a month. That's right in the act. And for white Americans at the time, lowest ranking of a private, that pay was $13 a month, and they didn't charge them out of that for the clothing. So it's like half the pay, right? And so there was that discrepancy. And then also, there was a bounty or a bonus for you enlisting, right? And so if you were a white person, there was the federal government gave you like some $302 plus another 60, and there were other incentives to enlist. Whereas if you were of African descent, the federal government gave you nothing, but the state gave you a bounty, of which white Americans got as well, which is another $300. So yeah, there was like half the incentive to enlist. But I think the people of African descent were just like, look, like we about to do something about this whole slavery thing, and we're going to prove that we shouldn't be, considered this way. We're human. And so they just had a whole nother, mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. So, all right. So how long did the 29th Regiment last? I mean, I saw the film Glory, right? I saw
right. Well, you know what? I saw it too, so I don't blame you. I know. Well, yeah, I mean, it went into 1865, but I mean, the primary battles were around Richmond, Virginia, from August to early August of 1864 through early 1865, and where they were engaged, and they were actually losing men. They, it was, and they were proving themselves, right? And so. Yeah, it was for me, kind of just reading the story, understanding who they were, and understanding what they were up against. I think it's something that you don't hear much. I don't think they really teach about it in the school system. I think a narrative around how they were reared and what it meant, I don't think has been presented as accurately as it probably could be. And so yeah, I'm just trying to throw that out there and make sure that everybody kind of knows what that is.
So give me some examples of some personal stories that like who did you find amongst this 29th Regiment?
Oh my goodness, a couple people, well, a few people. I came to the 29th because I was actually researching another individual in Waterbury, in Wethersfield, and his name was Prince Mortimer. He had been enslaved all his life.
I think I know the Prince Mortimer story. I think I know it.
Yeah, he had been enslaved in Middletown, and then he was like 87 years old, been enslaved all his life, making ropes. And he finally, to shorten the story, accused of attempting to poison his enslaver after he was being freed. And then he's sent to prison at 87 years old, and he spends the next, nearly 30 years or so in prison, and he dies in 1834 at 110 years old in prison. So I was actually doing work on that story, right? And he was buried at what at the time was Wethersfield Prison, which today is the Department of Motor Vehicles in Wethersfield. And he was buried supposedly in the prison cemetery, which was right next door. Today is a park called Cove Park. So I was actually doing research on him. And while I was doing that, a historian in Wethersfield told me, he was like, John, there's another guy that's supposedly buried here, and his name was Nicholas Monroe, and he was in the Civil War. And I was like, what? And so I start digging into Nicholas Monroe and find out he was from Maryland, and he came all the way here to join the 29th. And when he got here, it turns out that the 29th was full, so they put him in the 30th. Because Connecticut now was creating a 30th Colored Regiment, and so they put him in the 30th.
Oh, now that I did not know.
Right. Yeah. So that's how I got to the 29th. So then I was like, I got to know more about this guy. I go down to the state library. I'm trying to learn about Nicholas Monroe. I'm not finding much. And a guy named Kevin Johnson at the state library, he's like, John, have you checked out the Civil War monument in New Haven, see if his name's on that monument? I said, no. So I drove down to New Haven. I'm looking at the monument. I don't see his name. at the time, I wasn't like piecing together that the monument was like 29th specific, and I don't know if the 30th was there or not. I wasn't really piecing that together, but it took me on a journey to go, okay, who are we recognizing? Who are these people? What is this about? What are the details of the 29th? And that kind of started the whole ball rolling.
Okay. Because there's some dedicated people who are descendants of the 29th here in New Haven.
Oh, yeah.
And they were instrumental in getting this monument raised,
Right.
raise the money and get it up, and had some events around it. So how many men served in the 29th?
Well, that's the thing, right? I find some 1,700 or so enlisted that span the 29th and the 30th, right? But the 29th was supposed to be only raised to have 1,000 men, and I think they ended up going over. They ended up having nearly 1,300 men in the 29th, and then the overflow went into the 30th. But some of the records are sketchy. You're not sure, so it may be more than that 1,300. But what we know is the 1,300 men. So yeah, it's that piece right there is one that I'm really digging into, because I'm trying to figure out who served, who's on the monument, and how do we recognize these people in general, considering the time they were fighting in, the challenges not only of the country but of the state at the time. And I mean, they didn't necessarily want to raise a colored regiment. They were kind of pushed into a corner, and then what these men kind of experience, right? I want to make sure that if you understand the full context, like I see these people as huge heroes. Like we gotta do something about how we recognize them. And not only the fact that they enlisted, they were being threatened before they even enlisted, right?
I'm sure. I mean,
oh man, yeah,
we're
the
talking the
Confederacy,
Civil War. So
right.
I mean, slavery was still in full swing in places, and
that's right.
Well, yeah, they didn't want those black men fighting.
Oh no, the Confederacy they immediately were like, listen, you guys gonna put black men into the fight. Well, if we capture them, it ain't gonna no rules of war. There's gonna be a problem if we catch them, right? I mean, so they had that fear. Like, it's not like you're just gonna be like some hostage, and be returned with an exchange. You might be killed if you're black and you're caught by the Confederacy. So they had to deal with, that concern. And then when the 29th left New Haven, they boarded a ship and went right to Maryland. And when they're in Maryland was a border state. So even though they didn't secede from the Union, they still had enslaved people. And they talk about how the enslavers and the enslaved people, when they got there, did not treat them well. Right. So, I mean, the full context of it is like, what they experienced, I think, deserves like a more granular look. And I think a much more, larger kind of celebration of who they were and what they did.
So I imagine you've made your way to the Beinecke over at Yale.
Oh yeah. I've been to Beinecke a bunch of times. Yeah,
because they got all kinds of stuff in that place.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, that's an impressive place. Yeah, they check you too. You can't just walk up in there. You got to make sure you ain't bringing nothing in there. You ain't taking nothing out. Yeah.
Well, I say that to say because Mike Moran and who runs the Beinecke and a couple of researchers over there, they've been working on digging up information on what could have been the first Black HBCU in the country.
Ooh, yeah.
And so they found all the documents of what was gonna happen and what didn't happen and how it was voted down, and so I'm always fascinated by these stories of how we've endured and overcome, because oftentimes our story is so not told in its totality. It's just told from when we were slaves and that's it. Didn't talk about all our contributions while we were enslaved.
Exactly.
And how we came here, we weren't enslaved in Africa. We were Africans who were kidnapped and brought here.
Right.
And that's a different narrative, right? Like that's a different way to tell the story.
Absolutely. And some of the individuals that I'll be talking about at my lecture at the New Haven Museum on Thursday night, Some of the people
Yes,
I'm
I'm
talking
excited
about,
about that.
yeah, some of the people I'm be talking about, they came from enslavement. Like they may not have been enslaved, but they were coming from states where either one of their parents were enslaved, or they were in an area where there was slavery. They just happened to be free. And so they witnessed, this, they were like familiar. So by the time they got here and joined, they're telling those stories about, what it was all about. And also like another interesting aspect of this whole thing, like, when they're attempting to rear the 29th, right? I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was in this Connecticut State House at the time. And so he's hearing about this idea of rearing the 29th. And he's like, that's a horrible thing. That's a horrible idea. Why would we do that? You're going to give black men guns. They're going to
I was
turn
waiting for
and
that to
start,
come up.
right? Right. Are you crazy? They're going to turn and start shooting everybody, right? Like, there was a fear, right?
Yeah, and which still exists, right?
Right.
And there's no examples of there's no examples in history where we did that. I mean, yes, there was insurrections and rebellions and all that other kind of stuff. But when people joined the military, they joined the military because they had a goal. They had a singular goal of proving that they were men.
Right, that's right. And then to me, you can hear it. I got two narratives that I'm presenting at the lecture, and you can hear it in how these people talk. Like their whole thing is about, like, we're proving this for others of our kind and ourselves, that look, this narrative that's been painted for who we are is just not right, and we're here to prove that. Other than just being patriotic, it was broader. It's a bigger thing.
So what do you like best about finding out about these people? And when you find out something new, what happens?
What I like best about it? Well, for me, I actually was raised in California. And in California at the time, in the 70s and civil rights movement at the time, like there was a lot going on with regards to the Panthers and the US organization, a lot of that. My dad was like big into like, your features are good the way they are. Your skin color is right. He was like hard and fast, like make sure that you're prideful of who you are and what you look like, right? And but when I got a little bit older, I was in my 20s. I had my daughter. I realized I had biases against myself that I don't know where they came from, and the way my parents were, I don't know how that happened, right? And so a lot of my research and a lot of the stuff I'm presenting is with the intent to potentially and hopefully get those that are like me, that feel they're not, that's not them, but they have these unconscious biases that are behind their head somewhere that may be influencing or affecting the outside world. My intent is to hopefully get these people to self-interrogate and look in a mirror and do like self-reflection. So that's my intent when I'm actually telling these stories. I feel like, telling these stories truthfully forces you to kind of consider what you've learned, and then forces you to really kind of think about how that has impacted how you present to the world. So that's kind of what I'm doing. It's always fascinating when I find the things that kind of can help drive that direction for people, but they're not few and far between. They're easy to find, right? If you're looking, and so this is
that's
one
what
of
we're seeing. I mean, William Lansing, right? Mr. William Lansing. There's a statue over at one of the colleges at Yale, done by the sister who did the Huey P. Newton statue out there in Oakland. Dana King, I believe that's her name. Wonderful woman. And then there's Mr. Grimes' story, which that wonderful book. He had I think it's like one of the first earliest published books of slavery narrative stories about his journey and
absolutely
how he got to Connecticut and how he bought his freedom and tried to bought the freedom of his family and all of the kind of stuff. Prudence Crandall and trying to educate little black girls and here in Connecticut. So Connecticut seems to be chock full of where enslaved people and every time I go to a Juneteenth event somewhere in the state, every part of the state has been touched by some folks of enslaved Africans.
Absolutely. I'm a part of the Connecticut Freedom Trend. I'm on the committee now, and so that's what we do, right? We're like bringing stories and then finding the locations where these people either lived, died, worked, and then we're we're actually installing the Connecticut Freedom Trail marker there, so that, you know, and then there's a Connecticut Freedom Trail site where people then can go see where are all these locations, and they can follow the trail to, and if they want to learn more and you know, see those locations. And so yeah, there's a whole bunch of, in Connecticut, yeah, there's a lot that just has not been told. You talk about the Prudence Crandall story. I mean, I know Connecticut has kind of you know, kind of embraced that story. For me, the big part of that story is Sarah Harris, the young Black child that was like, look, I need to learn because I want to teach other young Black kids. And we don't hear a whole lot about Sarah. Like, we hear a lot about Prudence, but that started with Sarah. And so, like, you know, there's things like that. Like, I want to dig into that. Let's learn about Sarah. What, you know, and similarly with William Grimes' story, like that's a deep story there about how he escaped and what he was enduring in slavery and how he got here through New York, and what that meant, and what was going on with the African Americans around him, and then the folks around him that may or may not have been helping him. Right? I mean,
Right.
that's a really deep story if you really dig into it.
Right.
And so that's what I then do.
I'm always struck by the fact that folks ran for freedom and then they had to keep running, right? Like, you always had to keep, you know, and I'm also struck by how they found people, like they would keep chasing after slaves, you know, with no technology, right? Like, the technology of the day was like some kind of hand-drawn poster, right?
Right. Well, they found William Grimes because I think he ran into somebody that knew him that used to live where he used to live at. So he took it back. I think it was something like that, how they found him. But yeah, I mean, in the Fugitive Slave Act of the time made it legal for, if you left the South, you run away, the North had to give you back, right? Like,
yeah.
Right. And but that's another thing that kind of loops us back to this 29th story when Lincoln, you know, passed the Militia Act. He was, and then subsequently the Confiscation Act. He was basically like, look, we ain't giving nobody back no more. And matter of fact, we're gonna let them fight against you. Right. I mean, that was the big deal with that stuff. And, you know, so from that, you know, eventually perpetuated the 29.
That's a you know, because Lincoln was not a guy who was like, I'm for slavery, I'm for Black, freeing Black people.
No.
I don't think he was that guy. I think he was like, I got to look around and see what's in the best interest of what needs to happen here.
That's right.
And I think having people like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and people like that and Harriet Tubman in his ear, like they had his ear, right? And they were like, listen, you know.
Oh yeah, when you lay the story out and you see the events, like, Lincoln was truly acting in the best interest of a strategic move for winning the war.
Yeah.
So when he did things, it was like, oh, this is a tactical move that will get me to win. Oh, well, that didn't work as well as I thought. Okay, let's go to the Emancipation Proclamation threat and see if that worked. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's put the Emancipation Proclamation into law. I mean, it was like he was just walking through the steps that were like strategic to get him through, you know, to the end. That's what happened.
Yeah. So what happened to the 29th Regiment? Like, once the Civil War was done, what happened to these people? What happened to them? Do you know? Do you have any idea? Some of them, you know, did they get retirement money? Like, did they get benefits beyond, you know?
Well, yeah. Well, in the middle of the war, you know, right after literally months after the 29th broke camp, and they're in South Carolina, and they tell them, okay, here's your $7 for the month. And, you know, they were like, what? I thought we were supposed to get $13, right? They were all upset. The 54th and the 55th in Massachusetts, they just refused altogether. Everybody in their regiment said, we ain't taking that $7. That's ridiculous. And so in June of 64, the US government was like, you know what, we need them. So let's pay them like white men, right? And so that corrected that pay equity. But and after the war, from a pension perspective, they were able to do that as well. So after the war, yeah, folks were able to apply for their pensions, and that all worked well. And the people that I have traced, you know, they have different outcomes because, you know, Connecticut, you know, for me, the issue was bias and racism. Slavery was just an effect of that would allow you to think you could do that, right? And in Connecticut, right, Connecticut didn't get rid of that basis. The slavery was just ended, right? And so you see a lot of these people, end up the effects of them for it. For example, the Civil War ends, and it's Civil War over, and it's put up to the vote for the citizens of Connecticut. Should we let Black men vote? They emphatically said no. They voted that down, right? But in the South, all them Black men were registered because it was a requirement for the Southern states to rejoin the Union. But here in Connecticut, they voted that down. They were like, we ain't letting them people vote. Right. So where they were living here in this state, you saw the effects when you walk through some of these people's lives. The guy that I started researching for this, Nicholas Monroe, he was buried underneath that prison cemetery, but eventually dug up and sent to Yale for dissection. So I mean,
wow.
Right? I mean, so you see, like, they're being treated in a way that you probably wouldn't see had they not been African American.
Mm-hmm. So do you ever have chance to talk to descendants of the 29th Regiment? We have there's a bunch of them here, and I know some of them personally, but do you get a chance to talk to them, and do they tell you stories that they've heard through their family?
Wow, I would love to do that. I've only talked to one, and it actually happened to be another individual that was enlisted for the 29th, was pushed into the 30th, who's also not on that wall in New Haven. And so I've been talking with that individual, and we've been talking about their story and ways that we can figure out how to get that individual recognized. That's the most kind of conversation I've had with. I haven't actually had direct conversation with anyone else other than that individual. But I've heard some of them are coming to the lecture on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that. Also, my third great grandfather was also a Civil War vet, and his story is a wild one as well. So I kind of can empathize when I listen to these stories of the people going like, my loved one isn't represented. Right, because I have the same scenario. Like my descendant should have been buried in Maryland in Loudon Cemetery, which was at the time was one of the first military cemeteries that were established because so many people were being killed in the Civil War. But because he was African American, he was buried across town in a cemetery which was a Laurel Cemetery, which is an African American cemetery, and that was paved over in 1957.
Oh my God!
So there are like 30,000 bodies under a parking lot there, and my third great grandfather is one of them.
Oh,
right.
Lord.
So like I have those stories. So when I listen to these descendants talking about, I want to see where's my descendant? Like, how do I get them recognized? Like, I can appreciate it, right? Like I have that experience.
Wow. But there seems to be a great deal of movement around people finding bodies, like the one in New York where they were doing some work and they were like, oh wait, we hit some graves here. And then come to find out they were all African graves, right? Like it was a whole, for miles and miles and miles. I mean, it was like huge. And then they were like, well, what are we gonna do here? And you gotta have some humanity and dignity around this kind of stuff.
That's right. I mean, the reconciliation of like what happened and how to make it right is one that, there's two sides of it. Some people want to be like, oh, that's a little too dirty for me. I want to soften that. And then for me, I want to highlight that. I want to recognize how these people struggle, because I think if you lessen it, you diminish what they accomplished by enduring. Like I want to highlight they endured. So we've got to tell the whole story so what much they endured, right? How much we should be celebrating them, right? And so I just kind of see it from a different perspective.
Well, I'm looking forward to. I don't think I'll make your talk, but I know that it's going to be live streamed on Facebook, and so if it's there, then I can go back and watch it.
That's right.
Because I have another commitment, but I can go back and watch it because I'm sorry that I'm going to miss it. But I'm so glad I got a chance to talk to you this morning.
Oh, no doubt. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, 6 o'clock Thursday, 6 p.m.
Now, do you have a book? Are you working on a book? I'm
working on a book, but it's not specifically about these stories, I mean, these stories will be referenced, but it's much more larger kind of progression of like what got me to this place, starting in the 70s and kind of leading to this place. How did I get my mind to a place to think in these terms, right? And so some of these stories come up in it.
So John, tell me, when you look out at the country and you see all these states who are so anti-Black history, which is an American history,
right?
What does that do for someone like you who is a historian and spends your time in your life excavating stories of Black people? Like, what do you think about that when you're in these places and spaces where they are deliberately saying we don't even want you to know these stories?
Yeah, I feel like that goes back to, like, I think what we were talking about earlier. I think there's an unconsciousness of bias because of lack of education. I think there's a misunderstanding. I think ultimately, I think that people haven't been taught appropriately. They don't have the appropriate context. Therefore, they can't tie the lines to the reverberating effects to today, right? They can't go, okay, there's a health gap and a wealth gap, an education gap and all these things. Oh, here are all the lines that draw back to why that would be. I don't think they can make that connection because they haven't been given the right historical context and they haven't been provided the right historical information. So for me, it just reminds me of that when I see that. It's like, okay, it just just enforces that, yeah, I probably should be doing a genealogical dig into these things and presenting what I find a little better than it has been in the past, right? That's all I kind of gather when I see those things.
Okay. That's a very kind way of saying. That's a very kind way. Like,
I'm trying to be right with it.
I know. I was like, that's a very thoughtful, kind thing to say. Like, yeah.
All right.
Bless their hearts. They don't even know that.
I'm trying to present it in my mind that it's not a good and evil thing. It's an informed and uninformed thing. Like, I'm trying to see it that way.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. I appreciate. I appreciate that stance. I really do. I don't hold that, but thank you for giving me something else to contemplate and discern. I'll tell you so. Well, good luck on your talk. I hope that it is well attended. I think it will. And I hope that you meet some of the descendants of the 29th Regiment, because they are here in New Haven, and they worked long and hard to get that monument up, and they worked long and hard at trying to keep the 29th alive in people's minds here in Connecticut. So,
I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully I get to meet as many as possible. Yeah, that'll be awesome.
I think so. Well, thank you, John Mills. It was a pleasure. Come back and keep me informed of, as you find out stuff. Come back. We can do this all the time.
Absolutely. I'm game. Absolutely.
We can talk about this more and more and more. I find it fascinating. I do. I find it quite fascinating and so necessary. So very necessary. So
absolutely. I absolutely agree. I just go on and on. So you have to stop me. But,
all right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to the New Haven Museum for connecting us. I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Take good care.
You too.
All right. I'll see you soon. All right, Harry Jones, we're out of here. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be talking to somebody. Who am I talking to tomorrow? Let me give you let me give everybody a heads up. I'm talking to Michael Fidel, the Adrift Project. Now, you're going to want to know about this, so tune in tomorrow. I'll see y'all.
till the morning.